Good morning and welcome to this webinar on the importance and benefits of robust seafood traceability. Thank you all for joining us today for this event organized by the EU Fisheries Control Coalition, EU IUU Fishing Coalition. We are very happy to inform you that we are joined today by a prestigious panel who will discuss with us why traceability for fish and seafood is so important and what other factors play into traceability in the grand scheme of the revision of the EU Fisheries Control Regulation. Now, as many of you know, this revision is arguably one of the most important files on fisheries at the moment right now, and it is in the crucial stage of trilogues where co-legislators, that is the European Parliament, the Council of the EU, so the member states, come together with the European Commission to agree on a final compromise. Speaking of the co-legislator and the legislators and the Commission, we're overjoyed to announce that we have representatives of all three here today. Now, we're cheating a little bit because we will kick off our webinar in a second with a short video statement in which we'll hear from the MEP Grace O'Sullivan from the European Greens. But in this virtual room, we have with us today Ms. Francesca Arena, who's the head of DG Mare's unit on fisheries control and inspections. We've also got with us Mr. Bernd Sönkerat from Germany's Federal Ministry of Food and Agriculture, where he's the head of unit for sea fisheries management and control at the IWC. In fact, he joins us from Hobart, so from very much the other side of the planet. And a very big thanks for being with us today, despite being all the way over in Tasmania. And in fact, our key protagonists, I'm inclined to say, for today are the following. So 11 wholesalers and retailers from across Europe came together to publicly set out in a public statement their demands what the revised EU fisheries control system should ensure, so that they can be sure to sell to their customers legal and sustainable seafood. And as representatives of digital and traceable seafood, we have with us today Ms. Britta Gallus, the head of corporate responsibility at Metro, Paul Boyle, the managing director at Diversity Seafoods, and Greg Brown, the executive director at the Global Dialogue on Seafood Traceability, or in short, GDST, who is normally based in the US, but he joins us from the UK today, so he didn't have to get up quite so early, which is good. And then last but not least, with an exciting recently launched report on why traceable, sustainable seafood is good for seafood's profit margins and their financial bottom lines, we will hear from François Monnier, who is the head of the Oceans Program at Planet Tracker. And then last but not least, I think he will join us halfway through. No, actually, I think he's there. Robert Alexandre Poujade, who works as an ESG analyst at BNP Paribas Asset Management. So as you can see, we have a number of panelists today, which means that unfortunately, we won't have public questions and answers for you, our audience. But we hope we've come up with a format that will ensure that it's still a lively debate, meaning in the first part, we will have short presentations followed by a quick round of comments. And then in the second part, we will enter into a panel discussion with Ms. Gallus, Ms. Arena, Mr. O'Boyle, and Mr. Sönkerat. Now, my name is George Berner. I will be today's moderator. I represent the Environmental Justice Foundation as it is part of the two NGO coalitions organizing this event. So the EU Fisheries Control Coalition and the EU IUU Fishing Coalition. In the name of these two coalitions and all participating NGOs who are under these two umbrellas, we'd like to thank you again for joining, you, the audience, and also our esteemed panelists, of course. Now then, to kick off, let's hear from the member of the European Parliament, Grace O'Sullivan, who very kindly recorded this short video for us today. All right, we have a second try and hopefully it'll work now.
Hello and welcome to everyone at today's EU Seafood Traceability event. My name is Grace O'Sullivan and I'm MEP for Ireland South. I'm also the lead negotiator for the Greens group in the European Parliament on the revision of the fisheries control system. In these negotiations, we are intent on developing a progressive new regulation that will improve a key pillar of the Common Fisheries Policy. One of the most important issues here is that of transparency for the consumers, but also for retailers and wholesalers. For this reason, I warmly welcome the recent statement by major retailers and wholesalers on improving the sustainability of EU seafood. As it stands, poor control and monitoring of the rules significantly increase the risk that illegally caught fish can end up on our shelves. A number of key measures will be central to ending this, but some of them are alarmingly already under threat in the negotiations. Better monitoring, such as the remote electronic monitoring tools on board or the electronic logbook, will help ensure that the seafood on your plate did not come at the expense of the marine environment. So-called margins of tolerance, or the amount of catch that fishers are permitted to under or over report, also poses a serious risk to the traceability of European seafood if the rules are loosened. There is no other sector in the world where companies are allowed to misreport their products by up to 25%. And in fisheries, this could also mean a lot more hidden overfishing. So I'm delighted that you are meeting today to discuss these issues, which could shape the future of EU seafood sector. I also urge you to speak out against these proposals that weaken transparency measures in fisheries, and to reach out to other MEPs working on this regulation, as well as national governments. Thank you, and enjoy the event.
Now, in her absence, a big thanks to Ms. O'Sullivan and her team for recording this message to set the scene for today, and we will return to some of her statements later on in the panel discussion. I'd now like to turn to our keynote speaker, in fact, for today, that's Ms. Gallus from Metro, to give us the insight on the position that major European wholesalers and retailers take on traceability for fish and seafood. Britta, please go ahead.
Thank you, Georg. I'm very much delighted to talk today about digital traceability and positions around this topic. First, some words about Metro. Metro is an international food wholesaler. We are operating in 14 EU member states and in more than 30 countries worldwide. Our professional customers, particularly from the hospitality sector, they expect certain standards of us. In order to satisfy these expectations and to protect the important resource of fish, we committed to a sustainable fish and seafood policy already in 2012 with an update in 2020. Since then, we strive to increase the share of fish and seafood from certified sources. Ahead of trilogue negotiations of the EU Fisheries Control Regulation, we, together with other leading retailers, took a clear position towards digital traceability and aligned on a statement. In this statement, we are calling for an end to illegal and unsustainable fishing by EU vessels. Specifically, our consumers need 100% guarantee that only legal and sustainable fish is being caught at sea, and only legal and sustainable fish is entering our supply chains. The revision of the EU Fisheries Control Regulation is the opportunity to ensure full digitalization of the traceability system for all fish and seafood, EU caught or imported, or wild captured or aquaculture. This will ensure catches are traceable from net to plate. Today's paper-based and electronic solutions can go unrecorded and result in inaccurate and or missing data. The move to digital systems will require time and investment, especially for SMEs and small suppliers. Therefore, we all believe that a reasonable transition period and funding opportunities would easily allow for a future-proof digital transition. In detail, please let me highlight some of the important facts from the statement. The statement was signed by 11 companies plus the Global Dialogue on Seafood Traceability. Let's go to the details. Traceability along the seafood supply chain is necessary to combat IUU fishing and achieve healthy fisheries and aquaculture, both in the European Union and beyond. seafood traceability is key to increasing consumer confidence in the sustainability, quality, legality of our products, and avoiding fraudulent and mislabeled products in seafood supply chains. Seafood supply chains are often complex as products are sourced from all over the world. This can increase the risk of fraud, of sourcing from IUU fisheries or fisheries linked to labor exploitation. However, when key data elements are shared along supply chains through interoperable electronic systems, operators are better able to identify risks of unsustainable or unethical sourcing, as well as health and safety risks. As technology continues to develop, traceability systems will become even easier to implement and manage, and will also become more cost efficient. A digital traceability approach is needed to ensure transparent supply chain. The approach must ensure that all data elements necessary for transparent supply chains are recorded and transmitted at every step along the path of the fish and seafood product. We call on all EU decision makers to consider the long-term sustainability of our European fish stocks and the responsibility EU fishing vessels have elsewhere in the world. We urgently need effective traceability and fisheries control rules that will benefit EU consumers, fish and seafood producers and traders, as well as our environment. So we as Metro, we strongly believe that the digital traceability, like proposed in the EU Fisheries Control Regulation, and the standard with defined key data elements and critical tracking events will help to make digital traceability in the seafood supply chain happen. And that's why we support the Commission's proposal and why we are engaged in the GDST, the Global Dialogue on Seafood Traceability, represented today here by Greg Brown, the Executive Director. Commitment in the supply chain and common standards are key. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much, Britta, for this keynote and the important work by Metro, Diversity Seafoods, and also the GDST. And Greg, I will bring you in a minute. And also the many other companies from the wholesale and retail sectors that are calling for a progressive fisheries control system that is digitized and fully traceable. Now then, for a reaction to this keynote, let me turn to our two commentators in this first part of the webinar. That is first Ms. Arena from the Commission, and then Mr. Zankerat from the Federal Ministry of Food and Agriculture, to hear what your position is on what you've just heard. So Francesca, if I can turn to you first, please.
Thank you, Georg, for this seminar. It's always a pleasure talking about traceability and talking about the revision of the control regulation. I hope that you can hear me well and no noise very well. Well, listen, it's only more than welcome to see this statement by retailers and wholesalers on traceability that goes very much beyond what I would have expected, because it does not just address the legality in the supply chain, which is obviously essential, and I can understand, why it is from their point of view, but also ensures and touches upon very important aspects for making sure that there is, first of all, legality at sea. If there is no legality at sea, if there is no legality, at the entry point when the fish is fished, is caught, then inevitably this will have serious repercussions along the supply chain. So when talking about traceability, one has to have a very wide perspective. We are talking about what happens from the net to the plate, not just what happens on the market when the fish is sold, when the fish is transferred through operators. For that reason, when the Commission decided to reopen the fisheries control system and to address the loopholes of the existing system, which is already quite advanced compared to other countries, but it's not perfect. We looked at the loopholes, we looked at the gaps and what was missing, and we tried to address those gaps. So one of those gaps concerned traceability, because the existing rules are imperfect, as I said. The traceability of seafood products in the EU is limited to certain categories. It's only limited to fresh and frozen products. Does not cover the processed products or better preserved and prepared products, which is a huge percentage of products which are placed on the market in the EU. We had a rough calculation internally. It's certainly more than 50%. It does not cover imported products either, which is again a huge proportion, is around 60%. So we are in a situation today where the authorities, because the regulation is firstly addressed to the authorities, are not able, there is no tool enabling them to control the legality of these two big categories, the preserved and prepared products and the imported products. And secondly, the information cannot be transferred to the consumer, which are the to which the products are destined. Of course, in the middle, you have the supply chain, you have the retailers, you have the wholesalers, and the same type of information cannot be sourced to whoever is buying the products. So we try to fill those gaps by ensuring that enlarging the scope of the traceability provisions, and by making sure that we could address the loopholes of the legality at sea that Britta also mentioned. If you want me, I can expand later on those loopholes, because I think these are very interesting, and they were also mentioned by Grace O'Sullivan in the beginning. One of those is, for example, understanding what happens at sea through the installation of cameras on board, but also the digitalization of logbooks of all sorts of catch registration documents.
All right, thank you, Francesca. You're actually touching on a lot of points there, and I'm sure we will return to many of them in the panel discussion later on. You just mentioned, yeah, basically addressing the loopholes in the traceability system and giving control authorities better measures at hand to ensure legality and sustainability of seafood. So Bernd, if I can turn to you, obviously in Germany, there are such control authorities. So how do you view the Commission's proposal and how does Germany view it? And then also in light of the statement that Britta presented.
Yes, thank you, Jörg, and good evening here from Hobart. I'm of course delighted to join in this very, very interesting webinar. Of course, let me first address some words about the overall situation. I think we have now the reform of the control regulation over roughly 4 years on the table, and I think it's high time that we can find a compromise between all three legislators, or both legislators and the European Commission, as soon as possible. But it's not only about to be quick from now on, but it's also about high quality of the political overall deal. And I think traceability and legality of catches is of course very high on our agenda, as well as member state as part of the council. So let me emphasize, and Francesca, she said it already, we have on the aspect of EU fisheries already a pretty high standard in the EU. I would remind you that, for example, the United Kingdom, with the Brexit, they copied, paste and copy our EU regulation in their system. So I think the status quo is not so bad. However, what we can do, and there are a lot of already mentioned issues are on the table. So digitalization can bring us much more forward in the right direction. On the other hand, we have a lot of complicated questions. I would raise the issue of processed products. Francesca already mentioned it as well, and Britta, I think also. So the complexity of control and traceability within these products and all along the chain is a very challenging issue. So I think we are not in a perfect world. We will not be in a perfect world, but we have to improve the system, no doubt about this. And digitalization can help us in this direction. We have to pay attention from my side as well, not to forget, especially the very small, the small enterprises. And therefore, I'm happy that there could be an idea to have a feasibility study or something like this to see what we can really do in the midterm for this traceability, for not losing these small companies. But as you know, in fisheries, we have a lot of small companies, a lot of regional companies, and we would to promote regional products as well. And we should not kill them by a lot of things which in the direction of digitalization, which they cannot fulfill at the moment. But of course, the progress will be there, and in the coming future, perhaps there will be another situation, especially for the small companies. REM was mentioned as well. I think we can go into details later on. Perhaps I will stop here for the moment. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Ben, for these points and reflections, and also already responding a little bit to what we previously heard. Now, Ben, so what's great to hear is that, of course, digitalization, everybody here on the panel agrees that is a key factor in pushing traceability forward. You mentioned some of the complications, such as processed products, etc. And actually, I'm very happy that Greg Brown from the GDST joins us today. So if I can bring you into the conversation, Greg. So obviously the GDST's core work revolves around establishing digital seafood traceability. And I should probably say not just establishing it, but you've already got that in place with the standards that the GDST has. And since early last month, as I understand, you have become a full legal independent entity, the GDST, and you have a participatory industry-based structure now. All of that in an effort to promote better digital seafood traceability standards. And I believe by now there's around about 90 companies from across 30 countries that have adopted these standards. So given this backdrop and that you represent a significant part of the seafood industry that is already today ready for digital traceability, what would you say to what you just heard from Ben, for example, or from Francesca? Yeah, and also maybe like some of the smaller actors that are part of your initiative, which is now an entity, the GDST. Greg, please.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for inviting us to join this very important program. And of course, what I would say is the Global Dialogue on Seafood Traceability supports the revision of the EU control system. Traceability isn't a new concept, especially in the seafood industry. Data traceability is basically the process of tracking data as product moves from one step to another through the supply chain, from resource to market. And it's historically been achieved through a mix of paper-based and digital systems designed to ensure that mostly designed for food safety standards in the past, but expanded now across a much wider variety of requirements. Many new tools and practices and best practices have been developed over the last 2 decades to implement data traceability. And the Global Dialogue on Seafood Traceability is the major international platform that was convened dozens of seafood companies around the world to draft the first ever global industry standards for seafood traceability. This global membership participation organization is dedicated to advancing the standardization and adoption of interoperable traceability throughout the fishery and aquaculture supply chains. Let's talk for a moment about interoperability. Interoperability means how data can be standardized and collected at each step of the seafood supply chain so that it only needs to be recorded once, but it can easily be shared from one software system to another. It's one thing to have good traceability in your own supply chain. It's another thing to be able to share it along the supply chain and share it evenly across all the different software systems that would exist in that supply chain. The GDST standard identifies who is responsible for capturing the data at each critical tracking event. They specify what the key data elements are to be captured at each of those transfer steps. And it allows you to tie and transfer that data across the different steps all the way from the beginning to the end of the supply chain. Interoperable traceability improves business efficiency. It enables compliance with both customer and regulatory requirements. It enables the demonstration of sustainability assurances, and it gives consumers visibility into the provenance, legality, and responsible sourcing of the products they buy. Essentially, it shines the light of day across the supply chain and gives visibility to it. And in so doing, it removes the dark corners where bad actors can hide. And that's really why it's so important to the IUU mission that it brings. So that's my answer.
Great, thank you, Greg. And it almost sounds like you already have that system in place, for which, Bernd, if I can just quickly reference you here, you said that there should be a feasibility study. So I guess if that can be done, for example, in conjunction with the GDST, I think we already see that businesses have already gone a very, very long way to actually putting in place digital traceability, and are already doing it now. So that's certainly great to hear. And yeah, so basically, Britta, I can see you've got your camera turned off. Just because you were our keynote speaker, I don't know if you wanted to just very quickly react, seeing as though you presented the statement and then what you heard from Francesca, Bernd, and now Greg as well. If there's any key messages that you want to emphasize.
Yeah, thank you, Georg. I don't know whether you can hear me. Can you hear me properly?
It's fine.
Yeah, okay. I think, well, it's okay. It's okay. Okay, so I think what we heard is about interoperability, so that we make really traceability happening. It's very much important, and from my perspective here, to align on key data elements and critical tracking events. And this is why I think we need those standards, which Greg just highlighted. And well, what I see is that we do have here really a kind of a common direction towards digital traceability. This is what I hear from all the statements, which is really great. But also taking into account what we have to listen to SMEs and to find solutions to that we have really all participants in the supply chain integrated, because only then it works, right? Only if we have the digitalization through the supply chain, through the whole supply chain, we more or less at the end of the supply chain do have the accurate and the complete data. And this is important, right? So to provide our professional customers, in our case, with the information. So we need really everybody on board here.
Right, thank you, Britta. Yeah, your audio a little bit at times it's cutting out a little bit. So I don't know if you maybe got a headset or something, but it's fine. I think we can definitely understand your message, and I think that's also key. And very happy to return to these points in the panel discussion in a short moment. However, before this, it's actually our great pleasure to invite you now to learn more about some fascinating recent research from Planet Tracker that partnered with BNP Paribas Asset Management. And the interesting point is that this research actually shows the profitability in terms of better seafood traceability. But let's hear all about this from Monsieur Meunier from Planet Tracker. So François, if I can invite you to please give your presentation.
Thank you, Georg, and thank you for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to be surrounded by such great speakers. So yeah, today I'd like to talk to you about traceability, but from a different perspective, from a financial one, actually, which and essentially what I'll tell you is why seafood traceability is a profitable investment that benefits corporates, financial institutions, the general public, of course, and of course the ocean. So in a nutshell, let me tell you first about my organization, Planet Tracker. We are a not-for-profit financing tank, and what we do is to investigate the risks and opportunities related to environmental limits from a financial perspective. And financially investigating seafood traceability is exactly what we've done in our latest work. So let's jump right in. We have analyzed the entire global seafood supply chain, including, as was mentioned before, artisanal operations, or SMEs, but also illegal catch. So bringing that all together, we conclude that the seafood supply chain has very high revenue, so $1.8 trillion. It's in dollar here, but you can easily replace with a euro sign now. Which that's about the GDP of Italy, right? Just to give you an idea, that's huge. But the margin is really low, on average, an operational margin of the whole supply chain by 4%. And so if you have a low profitability, managing costs is extremely important, of course. So here we show the costs of fishing, processing, wholesaling, retailing fish, and those costs account for the vast majority of the price consumer pay for fish. It's not because companies make a huge margin on top of it, which is the green bit, if you want. And that's very important and very different from, say, high margin food and beverage, like beer, for instance. Now, in that context, let's see how traceability affects costs across the seafood supply chain. So I'll start with some bad news. We estimated that only 29% of the global seafood production is what we call ready to be traceable. What we mean by traceability readiness is when existing data suggests that there are currently more incentives than disincentives for the harvester of the fish to be associated with its production. So, of course, traceability readiness varies by country based on many factors, such as the prevalence of illegal fishing or the sustainability of local fish production. So here we've assumed that fish that is too unsustainable can't realistically be traced without a legal obligation to do so. That's the key point, of course, because quite frankly, the harvester will not accept. That's what we meant by traceability readiness. So in Europe, for instance, we estimated that 65% of the seafood production is traceability ready based on this definition, and only 10% is not ready. And we lack, unfortunately, data for the remaining 25%. So keeping this in mind, we have modeled in each region the costs and benefits of implementing seafood traceability, once again, assuming that it would be only implemented in supply chains that are currently traceability ready. And what we found, and bear with me with this chart, is that implementing traceability would increase profits in the global seafood supply chain by 60%. So on the left here, you can see the current profit pool split by stage of the supply chain. That's the different colors. And you can see on the right how it would be with traceability. And when you go from the left to the right, the biggest drivers of that increase in profits are a reduction in costs. So a reduction in cost of food recalls, of food waste, of staffing, mostly staff overtime. And all of these more than offset the costs of implementing traceability. So, paying for hardware, paying for software, etc., based on the research and interviews with experts. And what that means, of course, is that the margins of many stages of the seafood supply chain would significantly increase, once again, because costs would be reduced. But I think the most important point is that this is achievable with what we think, quite frankly, are modest investment. On average, we estimate that these investments would equal 1% of seafood sales for the entire seafood supply chain. So to give you an idea, in Europe, that would mean an investment of $2.8 billion for the entire supply chain. Now, let me tell you about an additional benefit of traceability that was referred to earlier, but I think it's key. And that benefit is transparency. And I say benefit because I truly believe it is a benefit for corporates. So what you referred to before, Georg, is a collaboration we had with Carrefour, the French retailer, and BNP Paribas Asset Management on a transparency initiative. Carrefour kindly agreed to share with Planet Tracker all of their financial data, effectively all of the data on their seafood in France. We then paired this data with environmental data, for instance, to compare the margin made by Carrefour on wild-caught seafood to the health of the fish stock. And what we found is that on overfished species, so that's the ones with the lowest score on the x-axis here, Carrefour tends to generate lower margin than on species that are not overfished. Now, I personally think this is the type of information that is crucial for corporates because it allows for then better financial management and to align sustainability and operational strategies. But you cannot have this data without robust traceability at every stage of the supply chain before it ends up at the retailer. And once they have this level of information, what we believe is corporates should then publish some of it, namely the species, type of gear, farming technique, and the exact location of harvest. And why? Once again, because this increased effort might well be profitable for them, so for retailers. In the case of Carrefour, we found out that even a 0.1% increase in the value of the Carrefour brand in France as a result of that transparency effort more than offset the costs. And so the net result would be a benefit equivalent to 3% of the gross profit made by Carrefour on seafood in France. And so I hope that this convinces you that it is in the interest of corporates to invest in traceability. Now, the last thing I'd like to flag is the crucial role of policymakers. If we zoom on the fishing sector only, in Europe, we estimate that the investment necessary to implement traceability on traceability-ready fish only equals just 5% of the fisheries subsidies received, much of which are deemed harmful anyway. So reallocating some of the harmful subsidies that have been prohibited by the WTO in June towards traceability investments is just an idea, but it could be a positive and a double positive. So this concludes my presentation, where the key message once again was that investing in seafood traceability could drastically improve profits in the global seafood supply chain. Thank you.
Thank you, Francois. There's actually a lot to unpack with what you've just told us, and really a fascinating presentation there. But I don't want to react to this. However, we also got BNP Paribas Asset Management, who's in collaboration with you there. And I'd like to invite Robert Alexandre to quickly give his take why actually BNP Paribas Asset Management got involved in this great research that we just heard about from Francois. So Robert.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. Yeah, it's just going to be a quick reaction. So I sit in the investment arm of BNP Paribas Group. We manage about 400 billion euros on behalf of our clients who need to have a stable biosphere to maintain their investments and the profitability and the good return of their investments. So basically, the aim was to try to understand with Planet Tracker on marine biodiversity, which is an area a little bit overlooked by data providers, which we rely upon to understand how we can make good investments. So we tried with Planet Tracker to really answer the question on how can we investors reduce our contribution to overfishing, IUU, preserve marine biodiversity. And of course, Planet Tracker was the natural partner to do that because they have been exploring planetary boundaries and how to make the link with the profitability of a corporate that remains within those boundaries. So that was one of the tests we wanted to do, to bring the next generation of data, of framework on seafood, which was a little bit lacking. This is how it was born. Also then to test, the data gap, what the reality of, the 4 million data points given by Carrefour versus the investor needs. What we need is a very granular information at species level with the full traceability, but the reality was the reality check was done by this great study by Planet Tracker. And also what we wanted to do is really to aim what François just said. It is a very strong signal that corporates in the seafood value chain can really, by investing in traceability, can be profitable. It's the best allies, a win-win situation. And that's also good for return and for our clients. So really to conclude, just to say that this type of case study, we really like those type of collaboration, especially in the context of TNFD, so the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, which is trying to bring nature at a higher level and to mainstream that in the private sector. And we really hope EU regulators will really aim for A when it comes to the new control regulation. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Robert. And also thank you so much, François, for the presentation of this report. As I said, there's so much to unpack because we're basically learning, well, Robert, you mentioned the stable biosphere. I mean, that's one thing, the sustainability and the health of the ocean that we and millions of people around the world depend on. Also in terms of better traceability, the confidence of the consumer. And then crucially, I think that basically traceability and traceability provisions, they pay for themselves. And François, you also mentioned that, yeah, well, it is that stable legal framework that is needed so that everyone gets on board and also profits from that. And so therefore, I now want to turn again to our two privileged commentators, so to speak. So that's Bernd and Francesca. Bernd, if this time around I can turn to you first. In fact, even with the point, so before you mentioned the difficulties that smaller operators may have. And I think we're all agreed that of course, maybe some form of transition period, some form of help is needed. But it certainly sounds like hearing Planet Tracker's research together with BNP Paribas Asset Management that, yeah, it could almost pay for itself. So what do you say to that? And also in general to what you just heard?
Yes, thank you, George, and thanks a lot for this very, very interesting presentation for me. I'm not really an expert on this aspects on especially on the economic value of such an approach. But it was really impressive for me to hear and to see these figures. Because it was on both from both sides, from the economic perspective and from the management perspective for improving stock situation. So I think there is a lot of potential in this makes it clear. And the presentation was very, very impressive from my side. On the other hand, we have to take into account the situation which we have actually, and if I understood it correctly, only 29% of the fish is ready for traceability actually. So it's a lot, and on the one hand, and it's there is a a huge gap still, which we could cover in the future. So I think the task is very complex to take into account all different situations of the chain of the suppliers, of fishermen, of course, and in different fisheries, in different stocks. But I agree that we have is really a field of importance and of great future to elaborate further on it in the coming years. And of course, we will try our best to create a new legal framework which could give you as enterprises and for all players certainty to make investments in this frame. And that's our task, and I'm looking very much forward for the final stretch on the control regulation. Thank you.
Right. Yes, I think we all do here on this webinar, and certainly a lot in the audience as well, I'm sure. So, Francesca, if I can turn to you, and of course, Bernd is totally right by picking up the number of 29% that is ready to be traceable, as Francois just said in his presentation. And I was wondering, so obviously, the European market is the biggest market for seafood. We're the biggest importer of fish and seafood products around the world. So by setting up a digital traceability system for all products, so including also imported products, I was wondering, could we, could the European Union not play, even beyond its borders, an important role in bringing more seafood up to this level where it is actually traceable? And of course, please also comment on the other points you heard from Francois and Robert.
Yeah, sure, Georg. Well, first of all, it was impressive to hear about the figures that Francois showed us. And it's probably because he has this background coming from heaven that he gives us such nice figures. In favor of better traceability, I wouldn't say not just EU-wide, but as you said, Georg, also worldwide. I mean, the fact that only 29% of the entire seafood production is ready to move to full traceability, to be fully traceable, is not a good indicator, is not a good starting point. However, I noted as well that Francois mentioned that at EU level, we perform much better. We are at 65%, with a percentage as well, which is not known. So it could be actually even higher, little higher. And indeed, the impressive number that he gave on 60% in terms of improvement for profits up to, I mean, gives a clear perception, I think, in my view, and it should be understood by everyone, of what as well illegal fishing can produce in terms of lost revenues, because by having more traceability and championing traceability and transparency, inevitably you cut off from the market the sources of illegal fish and illegal products. So in that respect, the EU can and has to continue playing a strong role as a champion against illegal fishing, to drive the policies and to continue defending the same principles that we have laid down in our legislation on the CFP. So by imposing better traceability rules, we will also make sure and that we will raise the bar worldwide of all products that we import in the EU. That's the reason why I said at the beginning, we want to extend the traceability provisions to all imported products by also amending the IUU regulation. That's one point I wanted to make. The second point, I think, which is very, very essential in terms of value which is given to the fish, and this is essential also when you look at the small scale, the small companies, SMEs, which were mentioned before, the moment that you have increased traceability, you can also increase the value of your food, the food that you placed on market. You can ask for better prices. And this is also another important element of the presentation of Francois. He mentioned the low profitability, and low profitability comes with a low value of the information that you can transmit to the consumer on what you are selling. But if you can also ensure that what you're selling comes from certain sources, you can ask for more money on what you're selling. So in that sense, I think we shouldn't be too much afraid of the impacts on small scale, on small companies, on SMEs, in terms of costs for them. But we should look at the bright side of what better traceability will mean for them, especially for those that want to sell at regional level. They want to give confidence to consumers of the source of their products.
Thank you, Francesca, for these words. Actually, sort of, in a way, indirectly, also answering some of the points that, going into response to the points that Bernd made there, which is a really interesting discussion. And Francois, I just want to give you the chance to now come back to the comments that you've heard by Bernd and Francesca, and if there's anything nice and quick that you want to say to wrap up this part and on your presentation.
Yeah, nice and quickly. No, thank you very much for your comments, and I agree. There's a lot of potential, but the reality is that it is challenging to implement all of this, right? I hope I didn't sound too naive or idealistic. There's a lot of challenges, but I'm sure they can be addressed. I'll leave you to the panel discussion to discuss some of it. Thank you.
All right, great. Thank you, Francois. And yes, so you said the right thing there. So we want to move on to our second part here, a little panel discussion on the topics of traceability, but also looking a little bit more upstream on additional factors that influence traceability. Some of them have already been mentioned, both by Grace in her video and also by Francesca regarding remote electronic monitoring. However, I just very briefly, I think want to stick with traceability, and I just very briefly want to come to preserved and processed products again, because now this may be anecdotal, but when I walk down the supermarket aisle here in Berlin in Germany, what I see are basically, for the most part, preserved and processed products. And this is a huge category. Francesca, I think you said 60% of seafood. And Francesca, if I could just very quickly ask you, why did the Commission propose to cover that as well? So what were the reasons for the Commission to say we want the same traceability rules, which are not covered at the moment, these preserved and processed products?
Well, I think I said it already at the very beginning, and I think it's worth repeating it. The existing rules are not perfect. We only cover only a certain percentage of the food which is placed on the market. Now, I think there is one point I need to clarify. It's not that there is no traceability for other types of seafoods. We have food safety rules. There is traceability in terms of food safety, but the requirements we have in the fisheries control rules go a step further, or let's say it's 2 steps further than what is required in terms of food safety. We want to have information on where the fish was fished, on the exact species. We want to have information on the vessel that fished that fish, and so on. So we want to know more to empower the actors in the food chain to make the right decision, to empower the final consumer, and also to give a powerful tool to the competent authorities to fight illegal fishing whenever they need to make any types of inquiries and cross checks. So, there are only good reasons to cover the entirety of the production. It is also a matter of level playing field. So why only focusing on certain parts of the seafood, only the fresh and frozen? Those operators will have to comply with certain rules. Other operators will escape the same provisions. So it only makes sense, and it only makes sense in the context of a revision where we extend, and I say extend, all the requirements on country registration to the smallest vessels. So all vessels will be in a condition to notify their catches by electronic means. And this will be the starting point to ensure traceability later on along the chain.
Great, thank you. Paul, if I can bring you into the conversation, and thanks for being with us today. Now, so what Francesca just said, obviously, is the Commission's position on traceability. From what we've heard, there are some governments, I'm not saying those on the call, certainly, but some governments in the Council have worried about sort of traceability obligations, that there may be unnecessary burdens. In the statement by retailers and wholesalers that Diversity Seafoods has signed as well, could you maybe from your side speak to these burdens maybe and these worries that some governments may have? Do you think they're justified? So from your perspective, could you talk about that?
No, it's interesting. I come from probably one of the most rural areas of Europe this morning in terms of some of the comments that have been made. And I refer to it as ground zero in relation to this discussion, because if we don't get it right here, all the rest is irrelevant. And most importantly, we talk about traceability and transparency and digitization as if it's something that's coming. It's here upon us. We've crossed the digital divide. There's no turning back in relation to this. And if I could just very quickly make a comment in relation to all of this. I get, as an example, I'm fourth generation in 40 years on the ground in the fishing and seafood sector, both nationally and globally. And as an SME, coming from ground zero, in my time on the ground in the industry, we've never faced a more critical moment in terms of decision making at a political and industry level that we face in the months ahead. And I look at each of the participants this morning in this webinar and thank and compliment each of you for your participation, because any interaction at this level, particularly at this level, that enhances the transparency and traceability of our seafood industry and seafood supply chain is to be applauded. But as a C-level stakeholder, it's important for me to express the following to everybody listening this morning. And the decisions that you make in terms of how we evolve, both as an industry and human perspective, into this new digital demographic will determine whether we have a sustainable future or not. And digitization, with its connectivity globally, allowing SMEs, and this is important to understand from a rural perspective, allows SMEs to access markets which they never had access to before. And the global supply chain, thanks to technology, is evolving B2C, yes, B2B and the retail statements which are made this morning, but we're evolving B2C, opening a whole new opportunity for small regional and rural seafood companies to develop into the future. But digital transparency and traceability is not a threat to SMEs regionally or rurally. In actual fact, it opens up the door to a very, very exciting future. And what's interesting here is that the EEC led the way in terms of a very simple act many, many years ago, and that was the introduction of the catch certificate. And catch certificate introduction has placed transparency front and center in relation to how we conducted ourselves onshore and offshore. And as we know now, new legislation from being introduced by the FDA, I think it's November the 7th, just down the road, for market access into North America are the first steps in this digital journey, and it is critical that the EEC follows suit. So from a very rural SME perspective at ground zero, what the opportunities that are being presented at this moment in time are absolutely incredible as a rural environment. But it's critical that we embrace this new digital demographic in terms of traceability and transparency now, and not view this as something that's coming in the future. It's upon us. We've crossed the digital divide. There is no turning back.
Thank you, Paul, for making these statements loud and clear, and really sort of giving the full spectrum, and also the perspective from SMEs and why it's
Just very quickly, George, when I leave here this morning, I'm actually going to be in contact from rural Ireland to a very rural part of India, and our discussion is going to be in terms of seafood that will enter Europe over the next couple of months, which will have to be, most importantly, traceable. And our discussions this morning will be in relation to our connectivity and how we will be able to digitize India and Ireland in relation to fulfilling that product fulfillment into Europe over the next number of months. So a rising tide on this side of the world in Europe, and Francesca covered this, but catch certificates alone in relation to this demand for traceability many years ago has placed us in a position now that where we're actually in the process of digitizing with another small community at global level, which will enhance certainly the figures that were presented by Francois this morning, which are incredibly interesting. So full integration and digitization, traceability and transparency led by Europe will assist globally in certainly enhancing the opportunities that we have into the future.
Thanks, Paul. I think you very convincingly raised the stakes for the co-legislators and the Commission that, basically they have a very important task at hand in not just setting rules for the EU, but as you so very graphically showed, basically the rest of the world as well, and raising the stakes for everyone and ensuring better traceability. That was really great, Paul. Thank you for that contribution, and I hope we'll be able to, from the NGO side, if I may say, quickly leaving my role here as a moderator, and spread your word, because that is so very important to hear that, and that SMEs are fully on board and encouraging better and digital traceability and integration, helping transparency. Thanks a lot. If I may briefly now look a little bit more upstream in terms of, Paul, what you just said, but it is something that is in the traceability statement by the 11 wholesalers and retailers from Europe and the GDST. And that is basically calling for a broad requirement for EU vessels to install CCTV on board, so cameras on board, with the aim to monitor illegal discards and also bycatch of sensitive species. It also says in the statement that should be an obligation to properly document and fully account for catches, and that should not be undermining by limiting the effective control of a few large fishing vessels. So basically calling for effective controls through CCTV and cameras on vessels, that is also important for retailers and wholesalers. So Paul and Britta, if I can stay with you, why is that important for you, sort of at the end of the chain, that there is really in the beginning at sea proper and good controls? If you could very briefly go into the motivation of including this point in your statement. Either Paul or Britta, if you wanted to address this. Paul, sorry, I think you're on mute, if I can jump in.
As an ex-fisherman, as a boat builder, as an individual who understands the intricacies of onshore and offshore, it's imperative that this comes into place sooner rather than later in relation to, back again to the initial comments that we made in relation to transparency and traceability. If that is not the case, then obviously there are red flags rising automatically in terms of why this is occurring. The vessels that are at sea within the European Union at this moment in time are some of the most technologically advanced in the world, if not the most. And most certainly there should be no issue whatsoever. And I would applaud any drive that would be promoted to have all of what you've just stated put in place sooner rather than later, to fully integrate the supply chain with complete and total transparency, to end directly to the consumer. And the sooner that we do this, the better, without going into taking too much time and going into too much detail.
Thanks. Yeah, Britta, I don't know if you wanted to add anything. If that's not the case.
Yeah. I think fully support, because it is the starting point for trust, and this is a trust building measure for our consumers and customers. So we have to start really from the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think Francesca in the beginning said that. Yeah, it's sort of key at the very start that we have sort of that the data that enters the supply chain has integrity and is full and complete. And on that point, on remote electronic monitoring and cameras on vessels, if I may go a little bit into the weeds here of what's on the table at the moment. So the European Parliament is proposing 12 meters and above as the length for where there should be cameras on board of vessels. Member states have moved to 18 meters and above. So there is a disparity there already. However, recently there was a WWF study that showed that it's actually certain types of vessels. So whatever their length, so it's not actually whether it's a big or a small vessel, but it's much more about, for example, the gear types that count whether a vessel can comply or complies in fact with the Common Fisheries Policy. And so I just wanted to maybe hear from you, Paul or Britta, does that factor into your considerations as well? The vessels.
We're back again to transparency and traceability in relation to the purpose of everything that you have covered, George. From vessel size perspective, I would be of the opinion that any attempts that are made to commence this at any vessel size would be of benefit to trust within the ultimate goal, and that is transparency throughout the supply chain. And how this will be achieved at a policy level, whether that be here off our coast or any other coast in Europe at this moment in time, will be very interesting to see how it evolves. But we need to start somewhere.
Yeah.
And most importantly, with some of the threatened species at this moment in time, and some of the conservation areas that are being promoted at this moment in time, and most importantly, the issues in relation to bottom trawling and what's happening in relation to that, and it possibly exclusion from conservation areas, irrespective of vessel size. It's very, very important that at some point and at some size, this has to be introduced in relation to building trust from sea level up to the end user within the supply chain.
Great, Paul, thanks. And can I get a very quick reaction from you, Bernd and Francesca, on these different figures as they're being discussed right now, as we understand, and the question of gear types and what Paul just said?
If I may start, Georg, is it okay? Yeah. Yeah, just of course REM and CCTV on the vessels is one of the key issues of the new control regulation discussions, and you said it correctly. So there is a difference between approaches between what the Commission proposed at the basis, at the starting point. Then we have our in the Council, our general approach, our position for starting negotiations, and now we have to compromise together. So I think it will go in from my perspective in the right direction. We'll say I think from our starting point in the Council was 24 meters and not 80 meters. And I think there will be a movement in the direction of for smaller vessels. And what you said, Georg, is very important. So we have a kind, or we need to create risk categories. So it's not a big vessel is dangerous or bad, and a small vessel or smaller vessel is without any risk. So risk categories is a very important criteria. Perhaps even more important than the simple size of the vessel, and we have to take this into account. And what I heard from the other speakers, so I think it will go in this direction, no doubt about this. We have to find a compromise in the council. It is a very complicated issue, you can imagine. But now it's a time to find compromise between Commission, Parliament, and Council on this very important issue. Georg, I have to leave now, because otherwise I will be kicked out from the building. I'm very sorry, and but I planned for 1 hour, and it's now already 1 hour and 10 minutes. Sorry for this, and have still good discussions.
Thank you. That's not a problem at all. And of course, it's already late where you are. And thank you for joining us late on a Friday evening for you. So yeah, please enjoy your weekend. Thank you. Thank you, Bernd.
Thank you. Bye.
Yeah. Although Bernd is leaving now, Francesca, do you quickly want to reflect from your side on the question vessel length and then rather gear types and other issues in terms of vessels and REM?
Well, sure, and it's I mean, the position of the Commission in the original proposal was not to set any vessels length limitation, but rather define the vessels based on the risk level. So we fully agree on that aspect. Of course, there can be certain gears that are at higher risk than other gears. At the same time, I concur with what Paul said. We need to start somewhere. So there is really a strong need and call, including, and I'm really pleased to hear that call from the operators in the supply chain, to have better transparency, to have better reassurances on the legality of the fish that they buy and that they supply to consumers. And having CCTVs on board is one of the tools. Of course, it's not the only one, but I think it also, the discussion we had today puts in a different perspective the important role of control and of the control authorities, not just to be the guardians of the rules, the Common Fisheries Policy, but also to work for the better profitability of the whole economic system. So if you can add more value, if you can remove the illegal fish from the market and you can add more value, this will have huge positive repercussions for the whole supply chain. This is probably an element that is never reflected in our discussions, I'd say at the interinstitutional level. It's probably not so well understood by the authorities, and this is one of the take home, I mean, the messages that I'm getting from today's conversation.
Great, thank you. Greg, if I can bring you in again, obviously you sitting here pretty much represent I'd say a big part of the seafood industry. And if you could speak to basically better traceability and transparency already at sea, and also where does the GDST start? So is it, do you guys also really start from the vessel and then all the way along the value chain? I guess that could be enlightening for all those that are interested about the GDST and its standards, and how also better controls of European vessels, etc., would help you and those that implement GDST standards.
Thank you so much. Yes. Well, first thing that I wanted to say just earlier in the conversation is, I mean, I'm really impressed with this group and the wonderful information that's been brought out. Let's just be clear: Europe is leading, but Europe is not alone in the regulatory environment that is improving for traceability. We have in the United States the Section 204 legislation for the Food Safety Modernization Act, which is about to come into force. We have in Canada the Boat to Plate initiative, which is a ministerial initiative anti-IUU. We have in Japan a recent initiative, it's anti-IUU initiative, which is asking for more traceability, better traceability in Japan. That is also including social factors in that for fair labor and proper governance at sea for human risk. We have in Indonesia a new system that was aggregating 13 different control regulations into one database, giving a seamless transparency to all the catch certificates and all the different elements of their fishery system to avoid people being able to land at different ports and putting in false catch certificates and so forth. We have in Thailand the whole integration of their previous movement documents, which was all hand-based. Now it's all electronic. So traceability is busting out everywhere across the world. It's not a province of one area or another, but certainly as Europe is the largest marketplace for seafood, absolutely, Europe is the leader. So that's really an important point to echo some of the things that were said. From the GDST's perspective, we're here as a service organization. We have tools and practical mechanisms to help the adoption of interoperable traceability across your supply chain. We're there with experts and people who can help get those companies started with an interoperable traceability system, who can help them understand how to implement their traceability through their supply chain, how to do it within their own organizations, the key data elements, the key tracking events, and the traceability process. And our singular philanthropic purpose is to expand traceability across the world. That's our mission. And that's what we're here to help provide. So there are resources out there to help, and we are a global organization as one of those resources to help.
Thank you. Thank you, Greg, also for showing that I'm inclined to say Europe really has to get its act together. I mean, the Commission proposal came out in 2018, in the summer of 2018, and to remain really a leading role on traceability and transparency, I think, yeah, an ambitious control regulation should be concluded very soon and agreed upon. And sort of finally, and we're almost coming to an end now, I just very briefly want to pick up on something that Ms. O'Sullivan said in her opening statement. And that is basically on the issue of the so-called margin of tolerance. She said that it's a serious risk to the traceability of European seafood, and that it means that in fisheries there could be a lot more hidden overfishing. Now, I noticed in the traceability statement by the 11 wholesalers, retailers, and the GDST, it says that, yeah, traceability is needed so that all these companies can ensure that all the data elements necessary for transparent supply chain, and that they have to be recorded and transmitted at every step along the path of a seafood product. Now, when it comes to this loosening of that so-called margin of tolerance, so essentially when fishers are out at sea, when they record their catches, and now if they're given more leeway and a bigger room to maneuver, Grace O'Sullivan called this a serious risk. Francesca, just ever so briefly, could you a little bit, like, expand a little bit why that is such a risk and why it could be a danger to the entire seafood traceability chain?
Well, Georg, you're now opening up a chapter that is it's a very important one, can be quite technical, but just in a few words, there is certainly a link between the concept of the margin of tolerance with traceability. And why is there a link? Because relaxing the rules on the margin of tolerance, which are rules meant to reduce the amount of under declaration of fish when there are quotas. That's basically by relaxing those rules, there is a higher incentive to underdeclare the catches, with huge impacts inevitably on the sustainability of the resources and of the marine environment. And as well, the same type of flawed information will be passed on throughout the supply chain. So imagine that you have a retailer, wholesaler buying certain seafood. They want to have a reassurance that the steps beforehand were carried out in a legal way. They want to make sure that the fish that they are buying is sourced from sustainable fish stocks. If this doesn't happen, if they don't have that reassurance because the rules are loosened and there is no strong disincentive or good control by the authorities in the first steps, then you'll see the repercussions later on. But the main repercussion, so you'll see them on their side, but the main repercussion will be on the health of the fish stocks. And this is what we are seeing already today in those very limited sea basins in the EU. There is one in particular, the Baltic Sea, where in the past there was a very dangerous relaxation of the margin of tolerance. And we see the authorities struggling, and we see as well the fish stocks struggling in that sea basin. So we already have the evidence and we already know what will be the consequence. And for that reason, the European Commission is strongly against any backtracking, any relaxation of the rules on the margin of tolerance.
Thanks, Francesca, for these words. And yes, sorry, just at the end, I wanted to briefly address this just because this topic has an impact on traceability and also, as you just said, on the health of fish populations. And from Francois and his presentation, we heard that essentially, yeah, I mean, the sort of overfished fish populations are those that are actually less profitable. So if I could ask either Paul, Britta, or Greg, from what you just heard, what's your stance on this? So I can imagine for you as those that are at the very end of the value chain that such a loosening of rules and jeopardizing fish stocks, that is not something that you would want. If any
absolutely not. Francesca's covered it. Am I on or off here? Francesca's covered it extremely well, and in 10 seconds to open the door to MOTs at the level that have been proposed defeats the purpose of the efforts that are being made in relation to conservation and sustainability. And if we go down that road and open the door at levels such as that, which no other industry globally would embrace, where it's self-defeating. Francesca's covered it extremely well. The Baltic Sea example is, and from a practical level, from a human level within the sea industry, the moment you open the door to that, abuses occur automatically.
Great, thank you, Paul, for that forceful statement. I don't know, Greg or Britta, if you'd like to weigh in as well, or whether you essentially agree with what Paul has just stated. I take your silence as agreement, and certainly, yeah, would understand. But thank you, Paul, for this. And now, actually, we're pretty much coming to the end of our webinar, and I actually want to address one last question to all of you. And that is, as you know, and as we've talked about today, so the control regulation is crucial, not just for Europe, not just for the health of fish populations, for the profitability of companies. And it's about really establishing a progressive digital traceable seafood system, among many other things, to ensure that fisheries are properly controlled in the EU, but also going beyond. I think we talked about the global impact of EU fisheries today. I mean, Paul made those points from the side of view of SMEs. Greg, you gave a fantastic overview of where there are other traceability initiatives going on. So as I said, I think it is really now time for the EU to get its act together, for the co-legislators and the Commission to come up with a progressive new regulation for the future, for the next decade and possibly more. And so, as you know, right now we're in trilogues, which means it's really crunch time now. So everyone here on this panel, I guess, except Francesca, seeing as though you're in some ways part of this, what in one sentence, from what you've heard today and also what your general points are, in one sentence, what would you say to those, the European Commission, the Council of the EU, so the member states, and also the European Parliament that are right now in the final stages of discussing the control regulation? In one sentence, what would you say to them if you had the chance to address all of them and tell them something? So I'll give you 5 to 10 seconds to think about this question. I don't know who's already ready to go with this. Just sort of one statement, one key message from today, if you had the chance to address all the policymakers in terms of the control regulation and what needs to be done now. Paul, if I can look at you, what would be?
Oh, okay, jump in the deep end. Okay, well, in terms of the information provided by Francesca, they're certainly well down the road in relation to what we view as, from ground level up, as the sustainable future, to protect our coastal communities and having a future in this industry, because that's what we're talking about today. And in one simple sentence to address it is that the digitization of supply chains, end to end, traceability and transparency is critical to ensure the sustainable future, economically and environmentally, that we all desire. To not embrace this at this moment in time, with the challenges we face down the road, in particular in relation to population growth and how we will feed that, will be detrimental to our industry.
Thanks, Paul. Strong words there. Who'd like to go next with your one key message to the co-legislators in the Commission on the conclusion of the control regulation that is soon coming up? Any takers?
I can go. I think yeah. Can you hear me?
Very broken.
Oh, I think your audio was better before, Britta. It's just now breaking up a little bit. I'm so sorry about this.
Yeah.
I think you may be frozen now, Britta. I don't know if we can hear you. So let me actually go to Greg. Yes, go ahead, Greg, please.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that in traceability, there's really no new data. It's all the data you already have. It's just about organizing it and putting it into the proper system so that it can be transmitted and shared as you see fit. You know, there's a lot of perception there that this is a big burden. This is somehow, you know, a whole new thing that we're going to have to do, that there's a whole new compliance. We're in a new, and that's simply not true. It's all about, it's quite similar to the original Codex Alimentarius principle. Say what you do what you say. This is a matter of giving transparency to what you're doing, and it's, you know, I think Francois really helped us a lot with understanding how the benefits of this certainly outweigh the tedium of putting it into place, and I think that's important.
Great, thank you, Greg, for that statement. And actually, Francois, let me turn to you, either you or Robert Alexandre, if there's one key final message that you would like to address the policymakers discussing the control regulation right now.
Yeah, I can start with, in one sentence, I'd say, try to find out what are the reasons why not to act. And if you examine them, trying to be impartial, you cost everything, you look at everything, you'll see that each of the reasons not to act is actually a bad reason. So we need to act on this, because the benefits are great for everyone, from the public to the fish, to investors, to corporates.
Fabulous, thank you, Francois. Not sure, maybe Robert is not with us. Oh yes, here you are. Yes.
I'm still here, but well, actually, if it's hard to say anything additive to what was just said, but on from an investor perspective, we really like the visibility of a good regulation, good policy making, which is how we need to steer our portfolios, where we need to go, what we need to invest in. So as we're seeing with plastic, the UN treaty that is being under construction, we see that policymakers are finally doing the good things, and yeah, and same on EU deforestation. We're seeing a lot of good traction, so it would be good to remain on that track and really aim for A. So yeah, this is what I want to say.
Great, thank you, Albert. And Britta, let's give it a final try. I just want to see maybe your audio is better now. I certainly want to give you the chance to react.
Sorry for that. Can you hear me? Yeah, do you hear me now? Okay. Well, I think what we all need to make really happen is the commitment in the supply chain, commitment in the supply chain, with all supply chain partners. So we need rules for everybody. It cannot be done by the end of the chain to implement digital traceability. So we need everybody.
All right. Thank you, Britta. I think the audio was not too good, but I think just about possible to hear you there. So thank you very much. I think we've really come to time now. It's almost 12:30. Thanks a lot. First of all, thanks a lot to all the panelists here today for joining and really for bringing in these diverse views and perspective, be it from the point of view, Paul, from an SME, sort of Greg, really the international scope of digital seafood traceability, then also the views on profitability that we heard from François and from Robert. And of course, Britta, the seafood traceability statement where Metro has really gone above and beyond to show that traceability is already here. And I think that's also one of the key takeaway messages. Digital seafood traceability is essentially already in place, and it is profitable. It has advantages even for smaller companies. I think that's something that we heard today, and it also helps fish populations. So I think there was some very great points today. Thank you very much, everyone. I'd also like to thank the audience for being here with us today, and I also hope anyone in the audience that you found this useful, this conversation. A big thanks also to the people in the background who did magnificent work to make this webinar happen today, and of course the organizers, the EU IUU Fishing Coalition and the EU Fisheries Control Coalition, as well as the generous support of our funders, Oceans 5 and the Walton Family Foundation. So thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for all your points. I'm sure we'll be in touch. We'll reach out. We are recorded this event, so if anybody likes to see it again, you certainly can, or if you know someone who's missed today. Thanks a lot, and I wish you a nice weekend later on, and thanks again to all our great panelists. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.